Coming up on Arirang News, Korean stocks plunge on the first Monday since Japan announced that it's removing South Korea from its white list of trading partners. Shares on the secondary Kosdaq down more than 7%, prompting a temporary halt to trading. President Jaein calls on the South Korean people to gather their strength and overcome Japan's retaliatory trade curbs. It's a chance, he says, to make the Korean economy more resilient and build future prosperity. And the South Korean finance minister announces new measures to help local companies overcome the trade row by giving them tax breaks, financial support, and securing supplies of 100 key strategic items. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. With Japan piling retaliatory trade restrictions on South Korea, both countries are preparing to hold their annual trilateral summit with their other neighbor, China. A senior Blue House official said Monday the date is being arranged. The South China Morning Post, citing Kyodo news agency, had reported the day before that the summit is likely to be held in the Chinese capital in December. Seoul and Tokyo are working to hold the meeting despite their trade tensions, and the question is whether they'll be able to find a breakthrough to resolve their dispute. The South Korean National Assembly's Defense Committee on Monday adopted a resolution condemning North Korea's recent provocations. It calls on Pyongyang to immediately halt its military provocations, saying that they're a threat to peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. The resolution adds that the North should faithfully abide by a joint military agreement between the two Koreas aimed at reducing tensions, and that it will be held responsible for any violations. This comes after the North launched multiple projectiles into the East Sea 3 separate times in the course of just over a week. During the session, South Korea's defense ministry also briefed lawmakers on related developments, adding that it's analyzing the projectiles and has stepped up monitoring with the U.S. In regard to Seoul's position on whether to scrap its military intel sharing pact with Japan, Defense Minister Chung Kyung-do said that the government is carefully reviewing that option, but nothing's been decided yet. South Korea's Ministry of National Defense is still reviewing when to begin biannual maritime drills for the defense of Dokdo, the nation's easternmost island. At a press briefing Monday, the ministry's spokesperson also said the size of this year's exercises is also being discussed. Held in June and December last year, this year's drills were originally set for June. However, Seoul-based Yonhap news agency reported earlier that the government delayed the exercises in a bid to improve its frosty relations with Japan. Last year, South Korea's Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and the Coast Guard took part in the drills. America's new Defense Secretary Mark Esper is in Australia on his first international trip since being sworn in, and he'll be arriving in South Korea on Friday to meet his counterpart here. They're set to discuss a range of issues, including North Korea's denuclearization, defense cost sharing, and the possibility of dispatching South Korean troops to the Strait of Hormuz. Kim Yo-sun reports.
U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper will visit South Korea this week to sit down with his counterpart to discuss security-related issues. This will be his first visit to Seoul since taking office late last month. His meeting with Seoul's defense chief Chung Kyung-do on Friday is set to receive the spotlight at home and abroad as it comes amid North Korea's continued military provocations. South Korea's defense ministry says the visit will be a chance to reaffirm the broad principles of the alliance. It added they will discuss a range of issues, including the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and the transfer of wartime operational control from the U.S. to South Korea. The talks may also cover the issue of cost sharing between Seoul and Washington to cover the expenses of stationing U.S. troops in the country. Chung and Esper could also discuss Washington's possible dispatch of intermediate-range missiles in Asia. The Pentagon chief told reporters in Sydney on Saturday that he hopes to see it happen.
But let's be clear, I'm talking about conventional weapons. INF range, right? Exactly. I would prefer months. I just don't have I don't have the latest state of play on timelines for either a cruise missile or long-range missile as the Army was preparing it. But these things tend to take longer than you expect.
The issue of South Korea's military intelligence sharing pact with Japan could also be an agenda item, as Seoul announced last Friday that as part of its countermeasures against Tokyo's trade curbs on Seoul, it could review whether to renew the General Security of Military Information Agreement, seen as an essential part of trilateral security cooperation with the U.S. It's also left to be seen whether Esper will make a formal request to dispatch South Korean troops to the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, currently in Australia with Esper, has said he hopes to see Seoul and Tokyo participate in protecting the world's primary oil shipping channel from threats posed by Iran. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
Another Korean victim of Japan's wartime sex slavery has died, having never gotten a sincere apology from Japan. An NGO that supports the victims said Sunday that one of the elderly women, whose name was not disclosed, passed away Sunday morning. The number of registered survivors in Korea is now just 20. In 2015, Seoul and Tokyo sought to resolve Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during World War II by establishing a foundation with a fund from Japan to help the victims. But the agreement was not made with the consent of the women themselves, and the foundation was disbanded last year. On the orders of top officials, Japan has removed a statue representing the victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery from its biggest international art festival. Japanese media outlets and artists are calling the move unacceptable and a violation of the freedom of expression. Won Jung-hwan has more.
Some critics say it was a move that has shown the world that Japan is a country without any consciousness of human rights. A statue representing victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery was ordered by Japanese officials to be removed on Saturday. The statue was on display at the Aichi Triennale International Contemporary Art Festival, where it was meant to be on show to the public for over 70 days. But after just a couple of days, the organizers were told that the statue must be removed by Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga and the mayor of Nagoya, Takashi Kawamura. The festival added that its decision to remove the statue was also based on terror threats by telephone and email. Following the move, the Korean artist who made the statue, Kim Un-sung, condemned the Japanese politicians for attacking freedom of expression.
I believe Secretary Suga and the mayor of Nagoya, these politicians, were deeply involved and pressured the festival's chief art director.
While criticizing the move, he was also worried that the removal of the display could hurt those actual victims that the statue represents.
Victims think of those statues as part of themselves. I hope the news does not reach those grandmas.
In addition, 2 other Korean artists participating in the festival have asked the festival to no longer exhibit their work, saying they don't want audiences to see their work in this kind of situation. The news also shocked locals. Japanese newspapers, including the Asahi Shimbun and the Tokyo Shimbun, strongly criticized the statue's removal, saying such threats are not acceptable or forgivable. And a group of famous Japanese artists requested that the statue remain on display, while organizers of the festival protested against the notification, saying it is the biggest post-war censorship and a historic violence. Meanwhile, it was revealed on Sunday that another comfort woman statue about 10 centimeters high was removed under pressure from Japan at Ravensbrück Memorial in Germany last year. According to the Korean civic group Korea Verband, which gave the statue to the memorial in 2017, pressure to remove it came from the Japanese embassy. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
The Seoul metropolitan government plans to build a new skywalk above the Hangangdaegyo Bridge by June 2021. Unveiling the design it selected, the city government expressed hope that the skywalk could be more than just a pathway. The skywalk crossing the Han River is expected to have benches to sit on, sun loungers, a viewing terrace, and performance and exhibition stages. Flowers and trees planted along it will create a green wall to filter out fine dust and keep pedestrians cool. Program trading on Korea's secondary stock index, the Kosdaq, was halted for 5 minutes this afternoon as shares plunged over the Japan trade tensions. The Korea Exchange, which operates the Kosdaq, says the so-called sidecar measure was activated at 2:09 p.m. when the index was down around 6%. The measure is used to prevent wild fluctuations. on the stock and futures markets. Trading resumed and the Kosdaq continued to fall, ending down more than 7.4% to close at under 570 points. That's a level not seen in more than 4.5 years. President Moon Jae-in says Korea should turn Japan's trade restrictions into an opportunity to revitalize the local economy. Speaking in a weekly meeting with his top aides, the president highlighted the need for determination in order to overcome Japan's retaliatory trade measures. Here's the president.
일본은 결코 우리 경제의 도약을 막을 수 없습니다. 오히려 경제 강국으로 가기 위한 우리의 의지를 더 키워주는 자극제가 될 것입니다.
The president went on to say that once the peace economy is realized through economic cooperation between the two Koreas, the country will eventually overtake Japan as an economic power. The president's so-called peace economy envisions peace and economic development reinforcing one another and providing a new growth engine for the economy. And the Blue House is arranging a meeting with the country's 5 main conglomerates to draw up measures to deal with Japan's trade restrictions. Kim Sang-jo, President Moon's chief of staff for policy, told reporters on Monday that he's planning to hold talks with the vice presidents of Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motor, SK, LG, and Lotte, although the date has not been fixed yet. Reports have indicated that they're likely to sit down on Thursday. Kim added that he has already met with all 5 VPs individually and as a group, and that they continue to speak on the phone about Japan's trade curbs. Now, Seoul's finance minister on Monday laid out a step-by-step plan to respond by strengthening the country's competitiveness. That means securing bigger supplies of key items needed by local industry, finding new sources for them, and tax cuts and financial support for companies. Hong Yoo reports.
South Korea's finance minister Hong Nam-gi announced on Monday measures aimed at eliminating South Korea's external dependent industrial structure as part of its efforts to cope with Japan's recently imposed export curbs. Under the plan, South Korea plans to strengthen its supply of materials, components, and equipment to revive the nation's flagging manufacturing industry. To do so, 100 strategic core items will be selected as items to be secured over the next 5 years based on their demand within South Korea. South Korea will push to diversify import negotiations with various countries and try to expand local production by solving pending issues that prevent local companies from producing items that are badly needed. In addition, the government will focus on establishing a healthy cooperation model between supply and demand chains among local companies. Such measures will be backed by support from the government, which promised to muster all necessary assets and capabilities, like extra funding, tax relief, and deregulation measures to ease the burden on South Korean firms. Hong also said the South Korean government will work hard to minimize corporate damage and uncertainty.
We will try our best to stabilize the short-term supply of materials, components, and equipment by securing alternate import partners. Along with this, we will proceed with the measures discussed today, as it's our task to innovatively reduce the external dependency of our industry through strong competitiveness in supplies.
Minister Hong wrapped up the meeting by emphasizing that Japan's removal of South Korea from its trade whitelist was an unfair economic sanction, and he again urged Tokyo to retract the move. Hong Yoo, Arirang News.
Seoul's trade minister has hit out at Japan for removing South Korea from its whitelist. Coming back from a meeting in Beijing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee said in a Facebook post Sunday that Japan's trade curbs violate global free trade norms, including those of the WTO. She also urged Tokyo to have a sense of responsibility because what it's doing to South Korea could have serious repercussions for the global supply chain of various products. She also stressed that several members of the 16-nation free trade bloc, known as RCEP, also condemned Japan's moves. A number of Japan's largest auto parts makers have been fined tens of millions of dollars by South Korea's antitrust watchdog for price fixing. The Fair Trade Commission says these companies had been colluding for a decade to rip off South Korean automakers. Lee Seung-jae reports.
South Korea's Fair Trade Commission says 4 of Japan's largest auto parts makers have been fined a combined $76 million. The firms were found to have been fixing prices, inclusion, when selling alternators and ignition coils to local automakers for a period spanning 10 years. The 4 Japanese firms include Mitsubishi Electric and Hitachi Automotive Systems, which were fined over $66.4 million and $3.4 million respectively, and were referred to prosecutors. Denso Corporation and Diamond Electric Manufacturing were fined nearly $3.5 million and $2.2 million, but were not referred to prosecutors. The FTC says 3 firms, Mitsubishi, Hitachi, and Denso, agreed to allocate their automaker clients before selling alternators, a practice which lasted from 2004 to 2014. When automakers sent requests for quotes, sales personnel of the 3 companies gathered to discuss prices. When selling ignition coil parts, 3 firms, Diamond, Mitsubishi, and Denso, fixed prices from 2011 to 2016. When automakers made bids for the parts, Diamond gave up the bid to respect the commercial supremacy of Denso, while Mitsubishi presented the highest bid. The South Korean car most impacted by the price fixing was Renault Samsung's QN5 model, which used parts from Mitsubishi Electric. Through the scheme by the companies involved, the QN5 model used overpriced parts until it was discontinued. The FTC says the fines were to be announced last month, but was delayed amid concerns it would worsen the trade tensions between Seoul and Tokyo. However, with Tokyo's decision to remove Seoul from its whitelist of trusted trading partners, the South Korean government decided to make the announcement now. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And Japan's trade measures against Korea are expected to take a serious toll on companies here that are already facing headwinds. But it's also widely believed that those measures could hurt Japanese companies and hurt Japan's reputation as a trustworthy trading partner. Oh Soo-young has more.
What goes around comes around. That's what most observers seem to think will happen with Japan's trade restrictions on South Korea. Trade and diplomacy experts told Arirang TV that Tokyo's export curbs on Korea will not only disrupt the global supply chain of key IT products, but also backfire on Japanese businesses.
Given the supply chains not just within Asia but rest of the world, American companies like Apple, which rely on South Korean semiconductor devices, will be affected. But people also forget, actually, it will be Japanese companies too, which are going to suffer from their own government's decisions. They are, after all, the biggest suppliers to South Korean semiconductors, and also sometimes receivers of final goods from South Korea, such as Sony. So Japanese firms are going to suffer from both the suppliers end and from the receiving end from South Korea's semiconductor devices producers.
Japan's trade retaliation against South Korea related to the dispute over Tokyo's use of Koreans in forced labor has sparked concern around the world. Its actions undermine the global trading norms and institutions, as well as efforts for multilateral cooperation.
The decision by Japan to remove South Korea from its whitelist is being presented by the Japanese government as based on national security considerations. I don't think the evidence really suggests that that's the principal reason, and Tokyo, I think, as many critics have pointed out, has been slow to really provide any concrete empirical evidence to support that claim. It is reacting in a way that is actually a departure from traditional norms in a context where states, not just Japan, but the United States, are using trade pressure as a means of resolving diplomatic issues, and that's very unfortunate.
Washington has traditionally been a mediator for the two neighbours in resolving bilateral disputes. But this time around, experts say the US is not likely to step in.
Unfortunately, the Trump administration has shown no real appetite to play that sort of role. What I would recommend is, as a matter of urgency, that both the Japanese and South Korean governments set up their own joint working group to at least attempt to create space in which dialogue can take place between the two countries.
Seoul has consistently reached out to Tokyo to settle the matter through dialogue. But the Abe administration has rejected these attempts, despite warnings that its actions will have repercussions in its own backyard. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
It's time now for an in-depth look at the market action on this Monday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Hwang Se-eun, Research Fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Dr. Hwang, thank you for coming on as always.
Thank you for inviting me today, too.
So Korean stocks have now more than wiped out all the gains they'd seen this year. The Kosdaq back to where it was in around January 2015. The Kospi below 1950. What's the story in Korea today and elsewhere?
Asian shares slid to 6-month lows on Monday, and the Chinese yuan slumped to a more than decade trough as a rapid escalation in the Sino-U.S. trade war sent investors stampeding to traditional safe harbors, including the yen, bonds, and gold. Markets have been badly spooked since U.S. President Donald Trump abruptly declared he would slap 10% tariffs on $300 billion worth in Chinese imports, ending a month-long trade truce. In response, China's yuan burst beyond the psychological $7 per dollar threshold in a move that threatened to unleash a new front in the trade hostilities. Seoul stocks extended losses on Monday as investors offloaded large-cap stocks amid growing concerns over trade tensions between the world's two largest economies and South Korea's own row with Japan. The benchmark Kospi fell 2.56%, while Japan's Nikkei dropped 1.74%. Kosdaq market fell 7.46% as of close, and sidecar, a brief trading suspension for market stabilization, was activated for a minute at 2:09 in the afternoon.
Got it. Now, the Korean won is also at the weakest it's been against the U.S. dollar in at least more than 2.5 years, crossing the 1,200 threshold today. It doesn't seem like the causes of this are going to be solved in the short run. So how high is the exchange rate going to go?
In the face of the escalating American-Sino trade war, its own trade feud with Japan and its worsening economic conditions, South Korea's currency is set for further slide in the coming weeks, probably touching the 1,251 threshold temporarily. After opening at 12.03 per dollar, the local currency expanded its losses against the dollar on news that the Chinese yuan fell to the lowest level on record against the greenback on growing worries that the world's two largest economies sparring over trade may continue longer than expected. The local currency began to slide despite a recent U.S. rate cut, usually a source of weakening for the greenback. Trump administration's move to impose additional import tariffs on Chinese goods is prompting concerns of a global economic slowdown, which in turn strengthens the dollar. However, the exchange rate is expected to remain at around 1,200 won, as the local authorities are expected to take active steps to stabilize the market.
Now, this week we can expect to learn some more from the government about how they're responding to the Japan whitelist decision. Also, the finance ministry releasing some figures on the economy. What can we look ahead to this week?
These are some key events to watch out for this week. On Tuesday, the Bank of Korea will release the balance of payments in June. Current account surplus has been shrinking down due to deteriorating commodity balances amid falling semiconductor prices. The BOK will also disclose its minutes of the monetary policy decision meeting in which it cut the benchmark rate last month. On Wednesday, the government will carry out business sector briefing sessions in order to minimize the impact from the Japanese export restrictions. The Ministry of Strategy and Finance will release the August fiscal report, which includes fiscal revenue and expenditure along with fiscal balances. This year, we will see the end of the tax revenue boom due to declining business cycle. On Friday, the Ministry of Strategy and Finance will release the latest Green Book. The government has recently diagnosed that our economy is slowing down for 4 consecutive months. Investors are interested in what diagnosis will be made this time under the Japan's export restrictions.
Indeed. All right, Dr. Huang, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thank you for your insights this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Now, the Korean government has set next year's minimum wage at 8,591, or about $7.16. The Labor Ministry on Monday posted the hourly rate, which will apply across all workplaces from January 1st next year. The wage hike is in line with the Minimum Wage Commission's decision in July to raise the hourly pay rate by 2.9%, the smallest gain since 2010. President Moon Jae-in had pledged to raise hourly pay to 10,000 won an hour by 2020, but there's been a strong backlash from businesses amid the country's economic slowdown and sluggish employment figures. And that does it for this hour. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.